Hi, everybody. Welcome to Inside Scoop with Sue. And today I am so glad to be back with Suniya Luthar, a psychologist and founder and executive director of the nonprofit Authentic Connections Groups. I love your program. I love what you do. And I want to start by talking about your whole concept of who mothers the mommy and we all know what it feels like to be depleted as moms. So how do we get replenished? And who even asks that question other than you? Like that we need nourishment.
Yeah, it's a good question. Who asked that? The answer to your question of who asked that question is nobody so far, except for the work that we have done. Let's go back to even why we asked that question. And I'll just give you a short answer to where I got interested in it. The short answer is I heard my own mother when she was about my age now, which is I'm almost 63 in December. She was very unwell, almost in a coma. And in that coma state, she called out for her mother. She said, "BG, where are you?" And at that time, it was a sort of epiphany saying, my goodness, it never goes away, does it? It doesn't matter how old you are. And I think pretty much that was one. And of course, the other was when I had my own kids. Nothing teaches you as a developmental psychologist than being in that stage yourself. And once again, I was just thunderstruck at the sheer enormity of the task and the fact that it never escapes you. So between the two things, I think this idea sort of took root in my head or heart, I should say. And from then onwards, Susan, I've been pursuing this question of the first thing I did was a study called Mothers as People. And I'll tell you more about that if you're curious. But that's where it all started, saying, let me try and understand what it feels like to be a mom, what it takes to help mom do well, rather than just saying, here, mom, this is what you need to do, what you shouldn't do, and what you're doing wrong, and so on and so forth. Look at what it feels like to be that person. Make sense?
Yeah, I so many times felt this overwhelm of like my own needs not being relevant in the story. In fact, almost feeling like it's selfish to say like I have to worry about my own needs because I'm supposed to put everybody else's needs first. So in that world of moms kind of being taught to be self-sufficient and take care of everything, it's a real asset a lot of times, but then it can cross over into being a deficit. So what do we do about that? What does that look like?
But truthfully, I think it's crassly unfair. I mean, I don't think any of us have thought about it that way. But if you take a step back and do think about it, Susan, I heard a mom saying to me yesterday, my children are my life. Now, I'm not sure every woman would go quite that far, but it's true there. We are preoccupied, especially when they're young and still at home and we're taking care of them, right? That is a central preoccupation of your very being and stays that way for not weeks, months, or years, but decades, right? So why would we not recognize this? I study something called resilience, which is doing kids' resilience, doing well in the face of adversity. And for the longest time, we had if a child has a good relationship with a primary caregiver, who's the mom usually, then all is good. And what I think I started to ask was, hang on, if the child is in an at-risk circumstance, such as dire poverty or, depression in the family or alcoholism, well, the mom is in that same situation too. She's in dire poverty. So what gives her the wherewithal, the equipment to be able to produce what the child needs in order to do well? So it's a long way of saying, yes, we have been told this narrative for generations, probably internationally. And I think also, Susan, we have been a little complicit as mothers ourselves because we have bought into this. We have sort of said, yeah, how could I ever do this for myself? How could I prioritize my needs? Because my kids always have, of course, your children have to come first, but you have to be somewhere in the picture. Else it's
Well,
not.
I just want to push back a little bit because if society tells us being a good mother is this way, and we're evaluated and so judged about whether we're a good mother, then I don't know how else to be. I have to be given permission somewhere, and this is the starting point. I think your work is the starting point here.
So I am by no means saying do not be a good mother. I say have the highest possible standards. Yesterday, the day before, Susan, I was doing an interview with Eliza Pressman, who does this, what is it called? Raising Good Humans. And one of the questions she asked me was about empathy that moms have for their kids. And she says, what do you do when your empathy is too much, when you care too much for your child and you feel it too much? How do you dial that back? And my answer to her was, you don't necessarily dial that back. I'm not saying you do not be empathic to your child like I'm telling you. The answer is not to dial back your standards of caring, as it were. The answer is to make sure that you are replenished yourself. So think of it as a mathematical equation. Now, here's you. You cannot give out what you do not get. So if you want to be able to put out the kindness, the steadfast kindness and nurturance and appropriate limit setting and all those good things, something has to come and fill you up. And that's the piece that we've been missing in developmental psych for so long, except now it's official. In our business, it's become official that this is something we need.
And how do we get it?
We get it by, all right, so the short answer to that is we get it by seeking out and prioritize staying connected with the kind of people with whom you feel psychologically safe. The kind of people who give you that same sense of being held, being comforted, being nurtured, the same sense that you want to give to your children at the very best of times, at your very best moments of being a mom. You want to be mothered in the best ways. That's what we all need.
And so tell us what your program is, and then we can talk about why it's different than other ways we get this.
So Authentic Connections Groups. It is, it's a 12-week program, once a week. And the first test we did of it was actually with physicians and other health providers who were all women, all mothers at the Mayo Clinic in Arizona. And they got it on the campus, 1 hour free time a week. So 1 hour a week in your own setting, whether it's your work setting or your community setting. And sessions are all sort of have a topic to them. Then they're all around relationships, basically. And the idea is that across these 12 sessions, what happens is that right from the get-go, Susan, women are not just encouraged, but gently nudged toward connecting with what we call your go-to committee, which you get to pick for yourself. So I would ask you, who in your life would you pick as someone who might be a go-to person? And you'd say, well, what do you mean by that? So anyone who we feel a little bit like safe with. Let's start there. It doesn't mean need to be a best friend or someone to whom you poured your heart out. Right, starting there, then the exercises every week, we basically reinforce the connections between you and, let's say, Betty or whoever you choose your go-to person. And the mechanism, the way it works is every week you come back and you tell your group members, they're usually about 5 or 6 to a group, everyone reports back on what they shared with their go-to person. So essentially what happens is there's at 2 levels. There's a bonds of intimacy being built up and strengthened. There are bonds between you and the other women in your group, and I'll say a bit more about that later if you like, but also bonds between you and outside, which is like a safety network that you are cultivating systematically and scientifically over time, so that by the time your 3 months are over, your facilitator becomes superfluous and unnecessary. You've got your people, you've got your tribe. Isn't that pretty? Isn't that wonderful?
Is the goal to continue those relationships, or is it like...
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I hear from some 2 years later, they're still meeting some of our groups. And sometimes they'll go to once in 2 weeks or once a month. But there's no question that they're there for each other. So God forbid, if there were an emergency, it takes a text message and they all show up. I just want to add what I was saying about the networks in the group. Before COVID, I had quite fortuitously, I published a paper on virtual groups. And I ran 5 sets of them. And I was trying to explain, so what happens in the groups? If you were to show up in a group and tell of something sad that happened in your own life, there you see immediately, instantaneously, this very spontaneously loving and kind and embracing faces on the screen looking at you. And I repeat myself with this statement: good therapy heals, but nothing heals like love in real life. And that's essentially what you get. And that's what you begin to rely upon, not me as a facilitator or whoever your facilitator is. You begin to rely on these real life people, which is what makes it so much more real.
Okay, so I have a few questions about it. The first one, and I asked you this the first time we met, how awkward is it to call that person and say, I pick you to be my best friend, or some version of I pick you?
It's very awkward for many of us. It's very awkward. When COVID started, I actually started my own group for myself, and it was difficult for me to ask. I was terrified, frankly, and these are all women I've known for quite, and I'm very close to. Um, yes, you feel diffident, you feel shy, but here's what you do, and it's in the session, the first session, whenever we talk about it, you tell your person, hey, I'm part of this group for moms. It's this resilience group or something, and this is my homework. I'm not sure I would have ever asked this, but I'm supposed to do this for my group. Is that, and here's the task. Would you consider being my go-to person? And here's how it works. And just being able to put it off on it's an instruction from work, or it's an instruction from my child's school, or any such, makes it that much easier to just take that first step.
And is that relationship mutual? Are you calling them and they're
Yeah.
giving back also?
Yeah. So let's say today's session is obstacles to reaching out authentically, or about shame, feelings of shame. So we discuss it in the group, and then you go back and you talk to your go-to person. Today we talked about shame. Obviously, you don't talk about who said what, because there's strict confidentiality, but you do talk about the topic. And then you and your person, and maybe it's a 2-minute exchange, or maybe it's a 1-hour exchange while you're going on a walk or having coffee, but you do the exchange. And you come back and say, this is what we discussed. And the beauty is, one of the beautiful things is, when you ask women, so how did your go-to person react when you said, would you be my, and the answer is always, they felt honored. They felt honored that I would trust that much to ask. It's never what, I'm not sure about this.
Yeah. All right. Well, so now on the other side of the story is the group.
Yeah.
Is that randomly chosen? Or are there groups, like you said, you put together your own group? Did you go to people you knew, or was it random?
Oh no, mine are people I knew. Yeah. So I looked back in my, pretty much, you can choose anyone from anywhere. So I ended up with 2 women from Northeast, down south, Southeast, Northwest, and myself, all over the country. Could have been someone internationally, as long as we could find a time zone that matched. So if you're picking your own group, and some women do that, they come to me or us and say, I have my own group, when can we start? If you're picking them, the idea is always to look for, as I said, people with whom you feel psychologically safe, right? Somebody once said to me, I think I'll ask my sister because we have so much to work out. No, that's not the person you want to do that with. We'll get to that later, but right now. So sometimes people will come. Sometimes when I run groups in schools, which I've been doing increasingly because of the huge burden of caregiving on teachers, administrators. So there in the school, sometimes the counselor will put together, here are 5 or 6 people who would work together well and be comfortable with each other. The fallback, the usual thing is you get on our website, which is acgroups.org, and there's a form there that you fill out, and you tell us about your age and how many kids you have. If you do, this is for non-mothers too, not just for moms, by the way, right? And what sort of group you might want to be in, a group for divorcing moms or single moms or older moms or new moms. And to the best that we can, we try and match people, and then off we go.
I've experienced a few different groups that were random, and people were so vulnerable immediately in a way that knowing people you might be more hesitant. Do you find that to be the case?
It's worked both ways, Susan, because remember, we had 2 trials at the Mayo Clinic. One was here in Arizona and one with nurse leaders and in the headquarters, Minnesota. And obviously, all those people knew each other. So we had a surgeon with a nurse practitioner in the same room. And all the school groups, obviously, they knew each other. They worked out fine. I think when people sign up for an in-house group, they're already somewhat aware that this is something that's going to happen and are reasonably comfortable or not uncomfortable with it. And then there are some, as you said, who'd much rather be with someone, with people on the outside, like celebrities, or journalists may not want to be with other journalists.
Right.
We know each other, or academics, and there's room for that.
So tell us how people feel. How are they? I mean, we use words like nourished and mothered, but like deep down, what is the feeling that in the feedback you get?
So one of the first things I see so often is life changing. The life changing means going back to your very first question about this whole mechanism and how come this all goes one way and nothing comes here. So that's one. And the change that happens is there is an ensured regularity of incoming nurturance and kindness that you can feel safe with. So some women have called it like, it feels like a blanket of love. It may sound cheesy, but it's not. It really does feel like a blanket of love. It's that sense of safety. It's like you want your child to feel that mommy's always going to be there.
Yeah, it's beautiful. So, people already have, if they're fortunate, they have a group of friends, and they've relied on each other for the moments that are tough, or the bragging moments that you don't want to put on Facebook.
Right.
But how would it be different to come and be part of a program like you're running, as opposed to just this organic feeling of like support?
Again, a pithy description is what one woman said. It's like where women get to after their second glass of wine, we get there right away. So there's not much sort of, not call it time wasting, but there's not much chit chat, small talk. We get right to business. And the business is to get to what you said, that level of openness, vulnerability, openness, which allows you to be open to receiving. If you don't open yourself, how can you get, right? So we get there pretty much instantaneously in maybe 2 minutes into each session, and that's how it stays throughout the whole intervention or throughout the whole program.
So have there been any groups? I'm sorry.
No, I'm listening.
Have there been any groups that were more challenging?
Yes. You always ask the best questions. There was one, and I shan't say who, but very, well, we're all hardworking. We all work very hard, but much more type A, for lack of a better word, and much more in a male-dominated setting where life was just done according to men's way of doing things, which is like, remember Sheryl Sandberg's Lean In, right? So these are women who were used to projecting their turf and, moving people away and so on. And most of them were fine, but a couple of them had this attitude of, oh, well, I have my people I can manage, thank you very much, which had me saying, so I'm not sure why you're in this group, but that was not my question to ask them because she was there. And that was hard because if one person sits in the group and says, I'm fine, obviously it makes it very awkward for all the others to be wearing their hearts on their sleeves and crying.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing worse than opening yourself up and feeling deeply vulnerable, and the other person says, "Oh, I'm sorry, you're experiencing that."
Yeah.
Wait, you haven't felt worried or sad or?
Yeah, that's a very good point. And so in this, there's a manual, so it's all very structured. In part of the manual instructions to all the facilitators is what I think most of us do naturally. If you're upset, we're talking about a tricky subject like depression or shame. Invariably, the facilitator will say something. As I said to you, I was shy about reaching out to my people. Will say something, not too much self-disclosure, but enough to let people know, the other women know, that I feel this as much as anyone else. We really are in this together. This is not big talk. This is not hyperbole. This is not pretentiousness saying, oh my God, we're all the same. We are actually all the same. Where we differ is how much we have each prioritized letting that good stuff come in and making sure that it continues to come in. People ask me, Susan, so you're saying moms need to take better care of themselves? and related. It's the oxygen mask thing. Moms need to put on their own oxygen mask. And to the latter, I say, actually, no. Moms need to have someone put on their oxygen mask for them. We can be gasping for breath too. In
Yeah.
the same way, it's not moms need to take better care of themselves. Moms need to prioritize being taken care of themselves, which is, as you were saying, going back to your earlier question about what society tells us and what our values are. So, how do I make time for this? I'm so busy. I've got my kids' activities and birthday parties and doctor's appointment, orthodontist, what have you, not to mention my own work for many of us. To which my answer is it's 1 hour a week. Think about medical care if you had to do this for your child's physical well-being. We know from resilience research, your child's well-being rests on the relationship with you, which rests on the degree to which you are tended. Now, take a step back and say, really? You can't do 1 hour a week for that? If you can't do it for yourself, do it for your children. If it feels
I think that if we can't get our heads out from like living for our kids, that's the reason to do it also.
Exactly right.
Like, because you are in fact doing this for your kids.
You are. And you may be just, what is the word? Secondary gains that come to you. You may even think about it, which is fine,
Right.
as long as you do it. I don't know if you know about the literature on depressed moms.
Just from what I read about your discussions, yeah.
All right, so there's people who've done extensive research on moms with histories of depression, and the effect on kids is so profound because it's nebulous, it's gray, it's dark, and they pick up immediately that something is off. So I've been depressed. I don't know if you have, but I certainly have had bouts of depression in my own lifetime, and certainly as a mom. I try very hard, valiantly even, to keep it hidden. Reality is that unless it is truly lifted, it is truly treated or helped, the kids do pick up on it. So this is not rubbish that I'm saying, if not for yourself, do it for your kids. It is for your kids.
Yeah. I think like no matter how you get to this, your motive isn't relevant. Like just get to it, because it's either going to be the thing that saves you or saves your kid or just makes you feel lighter, like carrying the burden of having no place to share. And one of the biggest reason we started Your Teen was for the same purpose of like, where do you go to say your worries about your teenagers where you don't feel judged in response to that? And so creating like these spaces means you can walk in there and say maybe the thing that you think is going to be the worst thing to say.
Right.
You can utter it and see that nothing happens and that people say me too.
Yeah. So that was your motive too for starting, eh?
Yeah, because raising teenagers is just so filled with judgment.
Mm-hmm.
If your kid has problems, it's always like, well, I saw that coming,
Mm-hmm.
like as if we fostered some negative outcome. And so your space is exactly aligned with what we try to do at Your Teen, which is to find out you're not alone. There's a community of people dealing with these same universal struggles. And these groups sound to me like not only you're not alone, but I'm gonna hug you.
Oh yeah, and hold you. Yeah. So, and there's another difference, Susan, which is what you're doing is such a service to parent kind, womankind, mankind, whatever you want to call it, humankind, by giving them that space to talk about suddenly what became from this delightful child morphed into this God knows what, monster, or someone who hates you. The difference with our groups is there's maybe one session about children, which is why it works for everybody, including men, including non-fathers or mothers. We're talking about you, Susan. We're not talking about your kids, we're talking about you. Now, how weird is that? When you had your first child, or your first child was in preschool or kindergarten, very soon you became known as that child's mother. This is next mom, not Suniya. right? So there is no space for delving into that, in the enormity of that investment, the pain that you feel when your child hurts, you feel it 10 times more. The worry, middle school, God, have we talked about my paper on developmental stages? Did I ever tell you about that?
Mm-mm.
Do you want me to know? Am I?
Yeah, for sure. Tell us. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is a story on developmental stages of motherhood and moms of infants, preschoolers, elementary school, middle school, high school, and then moms like me with grown kids. And do you know that on every single outcome variable we assessed on well-being and mental health, the single worst group or most poorly off was middle school. So it went like this. New moms, first time, infants, preschool, elementary school, middle school, high school, and then grown kids. Everything you looked at. And then when you stop, so middle school is the new high school, pre-adolescence is the new adolescence. It's just starting a little earlier. But the sense of confusion, even panic that we as mothers can feel when our kids start doing all those developmentally sort of on-time things like messing with drugs and alcohol and worrying about popularity and looks and so on and so forth. All of that comes to us at one time. Very confusing.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think like we talk as adults about middle school.
Yeah.
Like someone's behaving badly and we say like, look at them, they're like back in middle school,
Exactly.
right? Like
Yeah.
it's such a seminal moment in raising kids and being kids.
But so going back to you and the space that you have made, what people don't talk about much is that look of sheer scorn and rejection the first time you get that, and how it cuts you to the quick, and how it is unkind. Let me just say that it is unkind. Not to say that the child is being bad. It's developmentally appropriate even for the child to do that, but it is unkind. It feels unkind and it does hurt. And that is one of the things that we do talk about, all the drugs and alcohol and sex and popularity. We talk about all of that. What we don't do nearly enough is that sense of confusion. What am I doing here? I know how to do timeouts. I read what to do when you're expecting. I know how to change diapers. I even know how to do play dates. But what do I do when my child looks at me with that sheer dislike?
Yeah. A knife to our hearts.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Well, leave us with something, the most hopeful thing you hear when you're doing your groups. What makes you keep getting back to this every single day and making it your passion?
What I said, how many women say this is life-changing? The fact that we have had 0 dropouts. Wow. All the group, Mayo, educational, virtual, every single group, we haven't had one person drop out. This speaks to the huge need, the enormity of the need. And just if you look at our website, our website is acgroups.org. For authentic, acgroups.org. If you go there, you'll see the testimonials, what women say. And it's very, very moving and poignant. So anytime I'm having a lousy day and saying, whatever shall we do with this horrible pandemic and all the ghastly aftermath of it, I say, go back and read some of that. And there is hope. We just have to come together and do it together. That's it.
I'm so inspired by what you're doing. I mean, I've spoken with you about this a few times now, and I get off and say, I'm definitely doing it. And I haven't yet, but I'm going to.
Please do. And you can say, Suniya, I would like to be in a group with you or not with you. I want to be with complete strangers, and I'd rather not you be there. But just do it. Yeah. Can I just say one more thing? Someone said to me, Suniya, you're talking about a movement. And I said, yes, we are. And it's not a movement that I in science can do on my own. We all have to come together on board to do this. So I can persuade you till I'm blue in the face. But unless you and your pals and people really start coming and take like a Me Too for moms in the best ways, not complaining, we can complain too, but really about taking care of this horrendous gap that we've had all these decades and generations, lifetimes, that there's not enough coming in. We can do this if we come together and do it.
That's a perfect thing to end on. I'm so glad to be here with you again. Thank you, Suniya Luther, for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Take care.